Alright. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. Ghayra al-maghdubi alayhim wala-d-dallin. Ameen. So, today we are here for Homeschooling 101. I will say I've been doing this session for either 9 or 10 years, somewhere around there. I haven't changed it a whole lot. So, I've updated resources when I need to, but in terms of like kind of coming out of the pandemic, was that? Oh, okay. Sorry, the library here is locked, so we're having to like manage the door, which I'm grateful that they have the meeting room open outside of library times, but it is just an extra thing to manage. So when it comes to like pandemic schooling, which has basically been the last year or so, or just like those type of questions of like homeschooling for 1 year and then, going back to school, those are things where like, I feel like I can brainstorm with people, but that's not the experience that I'm coming from. So sometimes I might not always have fantastic answers about how to homeschool for 1 year with the idea of like going back to public school, but I'm always willing to provide resources, brainstorm, those type of things. Kind of where I'm coming from, a little bit about me. So my name is Shannon. I have been Muslim since 2007. I have been homeschooling since 2009. My original background was in IT. I got laid off in the Great Recession and kind of took that opportunity to stay home and then start homeschooling my daughter, who at the time was 10. And so she was in 4th grade. So we did 2 years of a virtual school, which we'll talk about exactly what that is. And then since then we have been homeschooling, and now, so I have 4 kids, and now that daughter is now 21 years old. And then my kids that I still have at home are ages 10, 8, and 6. So the younger ones I have been homeschooling since the beginning. And then obviously the older one is done with her homeschooling journey. She now goes to Metro State and is looking at law schools to attend, inshallah, in the coming, probably in fall of 2022 is what she's looking at. So we've kind of been, I have now, alhamdulillah, officially done every grade once. And now I've done 4th grade twice. So starting to kind of cycle back around. So that's kind of my background. And we'll just kind of get started here. If you guys want to do introductions, name, ages of your kids, and then, what brought you here? Like what makes you want to start homeschooling? I'll probably talk a little bit as we go on of like why we started homeschooling and how that's really changed over the last, how long it's been? 12 years. Yeah. And I think Deanna, not Diana. Deanna is online. If you want to put it in chat, you can. Otherwise, you can unmute. We have 2 sisters here, so they will introduce themselves. And then if you want to unmute or use chat after that, that is up to you. And I will turn you around. Ta-da! You guys are famous now. Ta-da! Okay, so if you can speak up. So name, ages of kids, and why you're homeschooling.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Deanna. I have 2 kids, a 3-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. And like many parents out there, I think COVID really made me think like, okay, do I really want to, put my kids through the public school system, or do I want to homeschool? I do have a little bit of like homeschooling experience, if you could say, for preschool, I love the Montessori method. But obviously, as my daughter's going into 1st grade and so on, I want to be prepared. And I'm really thankful that I met Shannon and I'm able to share this space with you guys.
Alhamdulillah. I'm glad you're here. I know you can't see me, but I hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Alhamdulillah.
kids, age 10 and 8. Alhamdulillah, glad got a hold of this Minnesota homeschoolers WhatsApp chat. So we started homeschooling last year,
Mhm.
like starting the pandemic, and then we tried virtual school, didn't work, and then so I decided to homeschool my kids. So yeah, I just need to learn more hows and whys and everything.
Yes,
What's
all the things,
all the
yes.
things.
Perfect.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mehtab and I have two girls, 11 and 7. I started homeschooling in January. Always wanted to homeschool, but I think the pandemic forced me to. So last year when the kids went into virtual, I realized that I still am doing most of the work and I didn't like to be having them, like push them to submit all their stuff, and we could have just done it at our own time. So we started homeschooling in January, and the reason I'm here today is because, okay, so we homeschooled 6 months, and I feel like I don't know anything, or it feels like I'm still at a starting point. I have all these questions that, even though after reading all these books about homeschooling, still doesn't answer. So I'm hoping that having this one-on-one, it will help me do another new start for this coming school year, inshallah. So
Inshallah.
thank you.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I had 1 year, I think we had homeschooled for 8 years. And granted, there was like a couple years where I just had preschoolers. When my second oldest, so now my 10-year-old, was going into kindergarten, I had this like, I don't know what I'm doing. What am I going to do? And people are like, you've homeschooled for 8 years. Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, but I've never done kindergarten. So I think there's some things that, like, I liken it to, like, if I told you how to make a dress, right? Like how to sew a dress yourself, I could give you all the instructions and super, super clear. But until you really start doing it, you'd be like, this, I have no context for this, like this is too much information for me to take in at one time. So I think homeschooling is kind of like that too. So what I'm hoping is that we can kind of get like an overall picture, but then like next step is this, and if you need help with that next step, I'm more than happy to help. I think I've told people a couple times, like, I really, really, really like talking about homeschooling. Like, so I really like when people ask me questions because I'm pretty sure my husband gets tired of hearing me talk about homeschooling. So thank you for letting me talk about it. Um, so we'll just jump right in. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so we have this handout. So usually this would be a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, I don't have a projector, whatever. We're working off these pieces of paper today. So we're going straight in with why do people homeschool? And since you guys are here kind of already with this idea and you have like school age kids, then these are probably relatable. People are concerned about the peer influence in the schools, even like in Islamic schools, what does that peer influence like? They want to make an individualized learning plan. Even the child could be advanced or they could be needing a little bit more help with things either way, or just they have special interests, whatever it is. Being able to teach the deen daily and not kind of putting that to the evenings and weekends, and like, because at public school, it's, you can say I'm Muslim like in a cultural way, but it's not really acceptable to like teach teach the deen in any way that's like beyond that. I'm just fixing my computer here. Okay. So being able to weave in, especially science and history, and like, Islamic history is world history, even though in a lot of places, or in like a lot of schools, and it might be changing. I really am going off of like what I was taught in school, which is like starting to become ages ago, where it was like Western civilization. So you're not taught any aspect of Islamic history. Being able to have more family time. This is something that, like, we started homeschooling mostly for the peer influence in the schools. My oldest daughter, is from a previous relationship. So she also has her dad that's like non-Muslim and that kind of stuff. And then she's at school. So it kind of felt like Islam was kind of just on the weekends and like these little pieces of time. And then she would kind of just, she was like a chameleon, like she's with you. That's my favorite thing too. That's my favorite thing too. And just like always kind of learning how to blend in with everybody. And I'm like, this could be a really dangerous habit if this continues later. And also for the academics, she was placed in like gifted and talented program, but it was like every other week, maybe she would do like a 30-minute thing where, you know, I could see that she was starting to kind of get lazy with her work, not, you know, putting her down, but like in the sense of like, I don't have to try hard to get an A. And it's like, no, I want you to kind of you don't keep growing by like kind of staying in that easy comfort zone. So I wanted her to like be challenged academically as well. But now, you know, one of the main reasons why we keep homeschooling is for that family time. Just being able to spend all of that time together. That doesn't mean that I don't have breaks for my kids. I have breaks every day for my kids where they like, no, mom. And I even tell them I'm a better mom if there's some times where I'm not momming. So if you want fun mom, you need to leave mom alone sometimes. But it still is that family time. We plan on going on, inshallah, a road trip to Texas at the end of September. And we can, because we don't have anybody else's schedule that we have to conform to, other than my husband's work schedule. But of course, that's flexible. So again, the last thing that I have listed here is scheduling freedom. Usually I have a couple of people that come with me. Unfortunately, their schedules didn't really work out. But I have some friends that are gone for months. You know, they'll go. So a friend that used to be here, she's now in Canada. Her husband was an architect professor. Like he taught at a university and he would teach them architecture. So then they would go on these trips to Turkey for him to like take his students and like study the architecture. So her and the kids would just come with him and they would like do homeschooling in Turkey, you know, and maybe like bring math and language arts with them. But otherwise you're just like, okay, we're in Turkey. Like, let's soak up all the things that we can while we're here. So then the next slide, I listed like, what is homeschooling? So a lot of people kind of have like these preconceived notions about what homeschooling looks like, but just like by definition, it's having an education plan that's chosen by the homeschool teacher. For here, we're going to just assume that this is going to be the family. You can have other people homeschool your kids. There's hoops to jump through, but that's really like a small fraction of like the homeschooling community. And so these are your kids that you're talking about. So we're just going to keep assuming that this is by you. I will say that you can bring other people in to teach your kids, but you having kind of that overarching like, okay, I'm choosing this person for math and this website for language arts and whatever. You're allowed to do that, to bring, like, you can't teach them everything. The materials are purchased by the family. And then you have to register with your local school district as a homeschooler. So that's that piece of paper that I brought here. You will send that into your superintendent of the school that you like are like your home is physically located in. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not saying that super clearly. So if you were doing open enrollment to a different district, you would not notify them. You would notify the district where you live. Yep. So you just do a Google search, superintendent of ISD 191, and you send it to that person, attention homeschool liaison. And we'll get to them. I don't know that I've ever heard of anybody hearing anything back like, we received this. Like, no news is good news. Other than me forgetting to send it in one year, I don't think that I've ever talked to the homeschool liaison. So don't expect that you're going to have any kind of confirmation from them. In the sheet that I provided, I'll have a link to it later here for Deanna, for you online. There'll be a link to this and you can just like take screenshots if you want. So this might look different than something like if you asked your district to send you something, or if you find a different form. It's not a standardized form. But this form is made by the Minnesota Homeschoolers Alliance, and it has all the information that is legally required and nothing more. So you do need to send in, actually, we'll go over that in a little bit. So then the next slide is, what is a virtual school? So that's on your second page here on the handout. So it sounds like you guys kind of either did the virtual school, or virtual school is a lot like the distance learning, except, well, in every district did it really, really different last year. Some people, you know, the teachers were online, they were having live classes. Other districts did asynchronous, where like they just give you a list of homework assignments. Virtual school is kind of more like the latter, where you get a list of homework assignments. They send you all the books, all your materials that you need. And they will have like one-on-one check-ins throughout the week, but like they're not going to be directly taught by the teachers in general, unless like they're having trouble. So it is a public school home learning option. So with these virtual schools, you open enroll to a different district. This district has purchased basically homeschooling materials, and they send it to your house. They will send you a computer. They will send you clay. If your kid is going to do an art project with clay, they'll send you like a personal whiteboard if they need that kind of stuff. They basically send you everything that the classroom would normally provide in a public school, and then you're still providing pens, pencils, paper, that kind of stuff. So, and then the virtual, so the next one, the benefits of a virtual school, it is a free option. So your tax dollars that would normally be going to your school is instead going to that school that you're open enrolling to, and that buys all those materials that they're sending to your house. The education plan is created for you. So this is why we did it for the first 2 years, because it was really overwhelming. Like, I don't know what they're supposed to learn in history in 4th grade. I don't know what they're supposed to be learning, this, that. So all of that is taken care of for you. You have a teacher assigned to each student. It is a bit more flexible than public school. You have to start and end on the same dates, but you could like work through Christmas break and then say, I'm going to take 5 days off for Eid. The only thing is during that Christmas break, you're not going to have access to a teacher. And then, you know, during Eid, you might have to like tell them, I'm not going to be at a Classroom Connect session. You know, you might have to check in with them about that kind of stuff. But so there's slight flexibility. There is more flexibility than going to a school. But then homeschooling offers like the most flexibility. So the next slide, I feel like I'm flying through this. You guys can stop me at any time if you have questions. So the benefits of homeschooling is you create that custom education plan based on your needs and wants. You can combine subjects with children. One of the things that I really didn't like about the virtual school when we were in it is that writing was a completely separate subject, and that like all of their writing projects needed to be on like a completely separate subject. I'm like, why don't we write about what we just read about in history? Why don't we write about the science things that we just talked about? Why do we have to write about like something completely separate? And I mean, there's room for that in like some ways, but for some reason, that one particular piece just kind of got me, because it would take like an hour or something that she was doing it. I'm like, it's a waste of time. Yeah, so accelerated learners, religious education, you can tie all of that stuff in. Again, history is just like, we're going to talk about Muslims in history as well. It's not like, so now you learned about world history and then we're going to like talk about Islamic history totally separate. Like it's all interwoven together. Homeschooling typically has the shortest workday. Up until, so last year, and I kind of abbreviated our day because I was teaching at Beit El Hikmah, which is a private school in Prior Lake. My kids were doing Quran class there and everything. Just, it was a way for my kids to get Quran class and me to kind of like talk to other adults for a while. But we finished our homeschooling stuff by 11:30. So we homeschooled from 8:30 to 11:30. And like I said, there's some subjects that I didn't do. I did like literature as their bedtime stories. And they did do, I suppose they did do history and geography at Beit El Hikmah. That was the class that I taught. So it would be more like 8:30 to 12:30. And most homeschoolers, until you get into at least middle school, if not almost high school, you're done by lunch. And then the afternoon is going to be free for you to use. Because it's not like a classroom where you're like, okay, everybody, we're going to pass out this piece of paper. Okay, everybody, pass back the piece of paper. You know, Billy, stop poking your neighbor. Like, it's way more effective with time. And like, you know, one of my kids is really good in math, mashallah. So there's times where I'm like, okay, like I see that you get it. Let's just move on. With my oldest daughter, the math curriculum that she used had like 30 practice problems, and I would have her do half of them. And then if she got them, then she doesn't need to do the other half, you know? But if she didn't, then she would do it like the next day. But it was a way for us to kind of like zip up our lessons and be a little bit more efficient with our time. And like I said, you have complete scheduling freedom. There's no minimum days that you need to homeschool in the state of Minnesota. There's very, very, very few requirements in the state of Minnesota, and there's no reporting that you have to do to the state. There are some requirements, and we are going to talk about that. But yeah, a lot of people ask, you know, how many days do I have to homeschool? How long do I have to homeschool? I came across something, it was on Instagram, it was a reel, but whatever, that's my source. And it said that school standards were meant to keep schools accountable, not meant for your kids. Like those school standards are meant to keep schools accountable. Okay, so then we'll jump into homeschool laws. Okay. Okay. So on this third sheet here, Minnesota homeschool laws. So any parent of any child is legally allowed to homeschool that child. If you are on their birth certificate, so that's adoptive parent, birth parent, I don't know about legal guardian, but if you're on the birth certificate, you can homeschool your child, period. You don't have to have a minimum amount of education. What's really interesting is that they've done studies of like, so the parent's education level and then how that relates to the, I don't want to say academic progress, but like academic achievement of children. And you see a correlation in public schools. You actually don't see a correlation in homeschools. So a parent that only has like a GED or a high school diploma, their child generally still performs just as well as a parent who has a master's degree, PhD, so on and so forth. Yeah.
I know you say it so casually, but it really means a lot. It's like, how much do I have to know, or like how many steps ahead do I have to go for me to be able to? It's such a huge responsibility.
It is, and I think, alhamdulillah, I'm really glad the way that the Minnesota homeschool law is set up, because I really feel like it counts on our mom guilt to like fuel us to make sure that, listen, I am not good at this.
Yeah.
I am going to find the resources for somebody who is good at this to teach my child. And I will say, like, give yourself some credit. You may be better at things than you give yourself credit for. Second, you can learn along with them. Like, honestly, so I had my oldest daughter when I was still in high school. My last 2 years in high school were at like a special teen mom school, and like the requirements for graduating high school get really flexible when they're like, you might drop out and you already have a kid. So we're going to just say you can do extra things of economics and you don't have to do high school government. I've never done chemistry. I've never done US government, like, but somehow I got a diploma. So like I know my limitations. And also when I started college, I had to take remedial English. Like I can get by, and I could. It's better now. I could get by, but like I couldn't tell you exactly where to place a comma. I usually just like sounds like a breath should be there. So we're just gonna put a comma in all the places, right? So like I recognize my limitations, my shortcomings. And so for like with grammar, I'm just learning along with my kids because I'm like, I know that I'm capable of learning grammar, but I also know that like, I don't remember them covering grammar past fourth grade. So like I have great fourth grade grammar, right? I can tell you there, two, but like a semicolon, not super sure, right? Um, so you either find resources or you start learning it yourself. And that's where like, it doesn't matter if you have a GED or a PhD, if you're self-reflective enough, then you'll figure it out for your kid because not even 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, or like 9,999 times out of 1,000, 10,000, whatever. Like you get like a lot of times you want the best for your child. It's such a small percentage of parents that like are only self-serving or, whatever that happens to be where like it doesn't serve their child. So that's going to fuel you to make good decisions. Anyways, so you have to notify your superintendent of your local school district of your intent to homeschool. So that's that piece of paper by October 1st after their 7th birthday. So for most kids, they're going to be in 2nd grade, unless their birthday is like somewhere in August or September. For most kids, that's going to be where they would typically be in 2nd grade. Before that, the school doesn't want to hear from you. Like you are just filling up their mailbox for no good reason. My 6-year-old, they've heard of 3 of my 4 kids. But when I did this last year, I had a 7-year-old and it was like August. And yeah, the school district had never heard of my child, even though she would have been getting out of 1st grade. And nobody's knocking on my door. So Deanna, for you online, the link that I have here, that's where you would find that intent to homeschool form. If you already started homeschooling, they have the intent to continue form on that same link. And part of that form, you have to list the standardized test that you're going to use. We will talk about some of the different standardized tests that I have on this resource form. But you do have to note that you don't really have to tell them if you change your mind. They just want to make sure that the test that you list is one that they approve of. And all the ones that I'm going to tell you about are ones that they're going to approve. And then the next one, homeschool laws continued. So I included another link here, an easily readable explanation of the law. So it's going to tell you when you have to report. I think you have to report up until they're 17. It used to be 16. You do have to have general record keeping. You don't have to turn it in, but like if there was going to be some kind of, if Child Protective Services was going to be called on somebody, and this is kind of like, we have to understand that back in the 70s for sure, and I think even well into the 80s, homeschool was illegal. So it wasn't legal and it wasn't illegal. So like we can thank, like honestly and truly, we can thank the conservative Christian community for fighting for our right to school our children at home, because they really did the work of pushing for this. And there were parents who got in a lot of trouble for not sending their kids to school during that process. So some of these, like having to keep general record keeping, this is to show if something were to come up and somebody is going to accuse you of neglect, which is like, I've talked to so many homeschoolers, and I think I've heard of somebody who heard of somebody who heard of somebody where this happened. Like it's so uncommon. The government has way better things to do than to ask you what math curriculum you're using. But you still want to kind of keep this, even just keeping a book list of what you use that year, just writing, you could just have like a journal. So we use Saxon Math, we use Michael Clay Thompson Language Arts, and these are the books that we read aloud. And these are like the science books, these are the history books. that would be suitable for your record keeping. For myself, I purchased a planner from Etsy, and I write down what I did that day. I don't plan ahead as much as like I plan our schedule. Like we're gonna do geography on Tuesdays and Fridays. We're gonna do science on Wednesdays. Like that's the extent of my planning. And then when I have done it that day, then I just write down we did pages 96 to 97 on that day. As my kids get older, I usually plan ahead a little bit more because there are like milestones that I want to reach. But as right now, they were in kindergarten, second, fourth grade this last year. So it's still like a time of exploration. It's a time of just having fun. And I mean, my kids, alhamdulillah, are learning a lot. They do quite well in the standardized tests. But I don't really have, it's more about exposure than like, you need to know this much by this date. Does that make sense? So you do have required subjects by law. That's reading, writing, literature, fine arts, math, science, history, geography, government, health, and physical education. You do not have to do every subject every year. In general, you want to make sure that you cover all of these in elementary school, all of these in middle school, and all of these in high school. So again, like there is not enough to talk about government for 13 years. I mean, unless you really want to get like in the nitty gritty and then they like finish with like a PhD in government or whatever. But like, of course you're going to do, language arts in some sense, likely every year, math, a little bit each year, all of that. Do you guys have any questions? Do you have any questions, Deanna?
No questions, thank you.
You're welcome.
The record keeping and the test, it's just for us to get in case we're ever asked or we don't have to report. So we do everything, just give a record.
Yes. So the question was the standardized test and the record keeping, is that just for us and we don't have to turn it in? Yes. So you get the results of the standardized test. That's a tool. That's a tool for you. You don't have to turn it in. They do suggest if they get below 30th percentile in something that you look into like some kind of options to kind of help them progress. It is a really nice, I appreciate the tool. I mean, everybody kind of lands differently of like how they feel about standardized testing. I appreciate the tool and being able to see, okay, my child was like on point. So for instance, one thing is for me this last year was science. Like I was ready to like throw out my science curriculum. I'm like, I feel like this isn't working. She's not getting it. And so when we did the standardized test, science is like an add-on, like you don't have to test for it. And I added it on and she like literally tested out of the science test that, and she was given like a 3 to 5, science, third grade to fifth grade, and then but they still did like 11th grade plus. But if they gave her like a 9th to 11th grade, I don't think she would get the same scores. So you have to you always have to take it with a grain of salt. But that was a tool for me to say, okay, this is working just fine. I don't need to spend my money on something else. And like, when you really get, not everybody, at least for myself and, a number of people, you can spend a really large amount of time looking at curriculum and just like, what books do I want to use? This one looks cool, but this one has this other thing. Okay. So I saved myself that time of not looking for that. Or if a child is behind, so I will say all of my kids have been behind in reading second grade and before. Because I just take a different timetable with it. So, I kind of keep track of that. Do they stay at least growing? And what I have noticed, at least with a couple kids who have tested so far, is that they're behind. And then once they get to a certain point, then they like really shoot up. Just because my expectations that I have for them are different than what the public school expects. But again, I can use that tool to kind of gauge, I feel like they're doing well, you know, and how does that relate? Excuse me. Go ahead.
Are there any support you can receive from the public schools for the NDE or the public school system or the district that you belong to? Is there any resources or support that you can get from them
So,
that you are aware of?
yeah. So the question is if there's any resources or support that you can get from the public school system. So yes,
Or NDE?
Minnesota Department of Education. It would usually come from your district. Because they still get some money from your student or from your child for just like living in your district. They don't get as much as if they went to school, but they still do get some tax money from each child that is in their district. So you can do, it's called shared time, and shared time in each district might be a little bit different, at least in the Burnsville School District. You could take up to, I think it was like 49% of their classes through the public school. This is a little bit easier to function in things like middle school and high school, where it's like, you know, they have like a history class and then they move and go to science and then they move and go to social studies and that kind of stuff. I have heard of kids playing sports or doing those type of things through, or like being on teams through the public school. So they're required to, as far as I understand it, and we did use it one year. My oldest daughter did science at the public school when she was in 10th grade. Because once you get to high school, either for science specifically, in my experience, it either is a lot of work for you. And I have a computer science background, but when it comes to like, why do clouds look like this versus that? Like, I find it interesting, but I have nothing to add, right? Like, I'm not, yeah.
I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. So like while she's reading it, like I'll be like, oh, cool, you know, but like if she has a question, I could repeat what the book says, you know. So it's either a lot of work for you or it's very expensive. This is high school science specifically. So that one year I had her go to the public school to take science. So yeah, it's free. One of the ladies at the front, so I had to have her like sign in at the front office and then sign out because she was essentially like a guest. They were super, super nice. And like, they're like, you can come to prom and come to all the dances and our Halloween party. And I'm like, half the reason why we don't come here. But, you know, they were super, super nice. And like one of the ladies took pity on her. It's like a third of a mile from our house. So I'm like, you can walk. Like, I'm not going to drive you. This is good for you. You're never outside. You never walk. Like, you're welcome. And the lady felt sorry for her and like set up like one of those little buses to come and pick her up and bring her the third of a mile to the school for her science class and then bring her home. So whatever, yes, they were very accommodating. You know, each district, each school, you're going to have, you know, you're dealing with different people. So you're going to have different experiences, but it is something that you can explore for sure. And I think you would just contact your homeschool liaison at your district and they'll get you to the next person. And I think eventually you would kind of get in contact with the school and figure out, like we had to figure out what the schedule was for science and which ones had rooms. So there might be places that don't have, you know, if their classroom is already full, then they might not be able to accommodate you. But it is, yeah, it's something you can definitely look into. And it's called shared time. Like in the law, it's called shared time. And then the homeschooling resources handout, which is the last piece of paper. I wanted to kind of go over this with you guys. So the first thing I did is I listed the virtual schools. I've seen quite a few more pop up in the last couple of years. Also in the last 12 years, I've seen one ones pop up and then they die out, and new ones pop up and they die out. These two have been around since the beginning of virtual school time. They will be around for a long time. These are kind of the most tried and true. I have a friend who used both of them, like, tried one and then tried the other. And she said, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Like, they're really, really comparable. So it's almost hard to choose one over the other. So those are the virtual school options. Facebook groups are, when I first started doing this, we talked about Yahoo groups, and now that's not available anymore, even though it's like way more efficient than Facebook groups. But so on Facebook, I listed a couple Facebook groups that I have found useful. I will say Minnesota Homeschoolers is distinctly secular. So you can ask like general questions, like, are there other Muslims that like want to get together? Like, that's totally fine. They do have a worldview that they keep their group in line with. So either that's wonderful and you love it, or you're like, okay, I'm just not going to ask those. So vaccines is one of them. If anybody has questions about like how to not get a vaccine, there's some roasting that happens. What's the other one? Oh, LGBT. Like, there's no like, I'm so frustrated about LGBT stuff in public school. Like, that's not going to fly. It's a very liberal group, but that does mean that you could for sure ask, like, I'm looking for other Muslims to meet up with. Like, that's totally allowed. But those two subjects in particular have gotten heated. So just like, that's just not the place for that. It's not that hard to homeschool high school, but it sounds like you guys are not in that place. But that is a Facebook group where, because high school, like, it feels like a really big deal. Like, how could I ever, right? I've done it. I'm like almost a high school dropout. I mean, I do, alhamdulillah, have a bachelor's degree now, but like, it was on that path. And I did it, like, we did it. She graduated high school as the mom. Like, you can write their transcript, you can give them a high school diploma. You don't have to get that in Minnesota, because every state is different. So it is legal to homeschool in all 50 states. That's the only common thread between them. In Texas, I think you don't even have to tell the district that you're homeschooling. You just like stop showing up, I guess. I don't know. I think it's like Pennsylvania, you have to like make a portfolio. So in Minnesota, it really, like, as the group says, it's not that hard to homeschool high school. She's actually based out of Missouri, the woman that runs that. I've met her, she's wonderful. And it just kind of helps kind of take our anxiety down a notch of like, I can do this. I really, really can. Minnesota homeschool classes and co-ops. So that's the place where you're like, I want to do an art class, or like, what's going on? What is happening in the community? Another reason why we went from the virtual school to traditional homeschooling is, outside of the pandemic, there's so many things going on in the homeschool community. I really felt like I was missing out. Like, you could do something, you could leave the house and do something with the homeschool community, like literally every day. So there's nature walks on this day every week, or there's a play this week, there's a museum thing that week. There's so many things to take advantage of, like in a positive way, that you could be out of the house every day. So that's a good thing, or it's an overwhelming thing, or whatever. And then websites, the Minnesota Homeschoolers Alliance is at homeschoolers.org. I will say their security certificate is expired. Google will tell you this is an unsafe website. It's fine. You're not entering payment information there. Just go to the website. That's my 2 cents. You can get the intent to homeschool form, which I printed out here, information on laws, taxes. You would have to itemize your taxes, but you can claim school expenses on your taxes. You can do that as a public schooler as well. People just aren't super aware of it. And then they hold some local events. So again, outside of the pandemic, they've done a science fair in the past. They did a homeschool convention one year. Most years they did like a used curriculum sale, which is like so nice. It's so nice. It's nice for when your kids have aged out of things and you can sell stuff. It's, because then you just drop it off and then they like give you a check at the end. It's super nice. And then it's nice to get cheaper stuff because curriculum can really add up. Homeschoolclassifieds.com. So think of this as like Craigslist for homeschool stuff, but well, more like not eBay because you buy it outright, but me, I just list some things on there for sale. You tell me that you want it, you send me PayPal, I mail it to you. So it's like a national thing. I listed some books here. So the first two are distinctly about like a certain homeschool method, which is on the next sheet, and we'll talk about that in brief. So there's different homeschooling methods. It's not a religion. You don't have to pick one and stay with it for the rest of your life and like never dabble into the other ones. You can be like kind of Charlotte Mason-y, kind of classic, kind of whatever, and take what you like from each one. So these first two, the Charlotte Mason Companion and then the Well-Trained Mind. Charlotte Mason Companion is of course about the Charlotte Mason method, which is named after an educator right around the turn of the 20th century. The Well-Trained Mind, so we homeschool using the Charlotte Mason method. I still own the Well-Trained Mind because they have lists of curriculum and they'll say like, here's math, here's like 3, 4, 5 options for math and why you would choose one over the other. I think you can get the Well-Trained Mind from the library. So check that out. And then the other one that I like to highlight is this one by Julie Bogart called The Brave Learner. She is fantastic. You can find her on, she does a lot of stuff on Instagram. She has kind of coined poetry tea time. So instead of like, we're gonna learn poetry and it's gonna be really boring and I'm gonna force you to do it, she's like, we're gonna have scones and we're gonna get like a bouquet that you like found from the yard, like, dandelion bouquet, and we're just each gonna have poetry books and we're gonna read from it. And if the kids are too young, then like I'll read it for them and they're just choosing the picture and just like exploring poetry. So like that's kind of her method in general, is like, let's explore this and like pick it apart and have fun with it, but like not kill ourselves over the details. Her in particular, she was doing like might have been like an Instagram live, or like it was Periscope at first when I discovered her. Now Periscope's like gone, but she did a Periscope, and I think she was talking about, they went to Washington DC and they were like touring all the sites, and her kids were like high school, college age at this point, and it dawned on her, she's like, I never taught them American history. Like, I totally forgot to teach them American history. So, because if you do the classical education model, you do world history the whole time. You do it like, you do ancients, and then you do Middle Ages, and then you do Renaissance, and then you do modern history. And then you go back and you do it over again, but like deeper. So you always do like, American history is kind of in there, but like she's in Washington, D.C., her kids are like grown or almost grown, and she's like, I never did it. Like, her kids are fine, right? Like, maybe she's gonna like be like, let's watch a movie together, guys, and try to like tie that in. But I just really like, she's very down to earth. She's really, really great. I'm talking about Julie Bogart. She has The Brave Learner, the book, The Brave Learner. And she kind of talks about how you can make your whole family culture just learning. Like, we're gonna go, inshallah, on this road trip. And so one of my like big plans, I'm really, really hoping it's not too expensive. So I'm like praying that we can do this. There's Big Bend National Park in Texas. So it's like right on the Mexican border. Like my kids have never seen this type of biome before. So like this is part of school. This is absolutely part of school. So like maybe we'll kayak through a canyon and like just kind of point out like, oh, these cactuses are interesting. Why do you think it's like this? You know, and just like kind of bring everything in, not like they're getting a worksheet, name all the things you saw today and explain to me why they're here. But just having those conversations and being observant and like being a curious person in front of your children. And that's some of the,
Modeling that.
yeah,
Because
absolutely.
what I'm thinking right now is that, like, I'm showing that curiosity, but then what if your child doesn't show that curiosity?
Well, and you guys might be curious about different things, you know, but them seeing that being like wanting to know more doesn't end. And that's one of the things with homeschool, like as long-term homeschoolers, we see, you know, the kids who ask like, what is it? There's some statistic that kids ask like 400 questions a day or something like that. Of course, it's like always the mom that gets all the questions. But we want them to keep that curiosity going forward. And one of the arguments that the homeschooling community, and I'm going to say like, I can't say that there's a study to back this up. So this is anecdotal, but a lot of people in the homeschooling community, myself included, feel that part of the reason why kids become less curious is because we said, stop being curious about that. I'm going to tell you the things that I think you need to know today. And that doesn't mean that we don't have like some sort of lesson plan. You know, for my personal experience, and of course that only like speaks for part of it, right? But in my personal experience, I need some structure to my day. I don't function really well if the whole day is unstructured, but I also don't want structure my whole day. So that's why it works really well for us to be very structured before lunch. And then after lunch, we're like, what do we want to do today? Do we want to go to the park? Do we want to go to the zoo? Do we want to, you know, do some art? Like for us, that works really well. For other families, that's going to look different, but it is that keeping a lot of space open for them to say, I found, oh my gosh, my kids find like dead insects all over the, like, I found this dead butterfly and I brought it in the house. Okay, like this is a homeschooling moment, you know, or like my kid found a crayfish shell in the river by our house. And so we checked it out, you know, and like those are like, that's how our whole life is homeschooling, you know, and just all of that being curious. And I will say that curiosity continues to be sparked the less we have screens. I'm not anti-screen. My kids are probably watching TV right now, honestly. But I am minimal with my kids. And I see, you know, just from teaching in the school for the last couple of years and just being observant, it does seem like the less the kids are on screens, the more observant they are and the more curious they are. You know, my kids see so many more things than I do. Like we go on hikes, that's one thing that I really like doing. I'm always looking at the ground like I want to make sure that I don't trip on something. And they're like, Mom, look at this, like there's a hawk nest up there. I'm like, oh yeah, there is, you know. They're just so observant. Um, and sometimes it takes like pointing those things out, like, oh, what do you think that is? How many animals do you think live in this dead tree? You know, and just like sparking those questions. So Julie Bogart is really a wonderful person to follow on social media. And I haven't read this book, but like some homeschoolers that I really, really look up to um, have suggested this book. I borrowed it from the library and then I had to return it before I even opened page 1. So that's where we're at. Okay. Oh, and I just realized I did not have that up for you online. Sorry about that. So standardized testing. There are a couple that I listed here. This Peabody individual achievement test, I think that link might be outdated. I didn't check it today, but you can Google Peabody administrators, Minnesota, and that'll bring people up. So your Stanford achievement test, Iowa test of basic skills, which you can both get from Seton or Bob Jones University. And granted, both of those are like Christian organizations. Until a Muslim organization starts offering them, these are some of our options. Those are your pretty standard tests. So like I grew up here in Minnesota. I took the Iowa Test of Basic Skills throughout my schooling career. Stanford Achievement Test is going to be the same thing. California, all of these are going to be written exams. They might be timed. You would just have to Google them to see like which ones are timed, which ones aren't timed, depending on your kids and what you think would work better for them. The Peabody Achievement Test is verbal. And so it's about 45 minutes that you meet with somebody, usually on, I want to say Skype, but that's outdated, Zoom, that you would meet with somebody on Zoom and you get their results like right away. The Iowa Test of Basic Skills, I think it takes a few weeks because you have to like send it back. They need to tabulate it and then send you the results. The one that I missed on here, it's from the website homeschoolboss.com. And that is your, gosh, what is it called? MAP, M-A-P test. And it's not like map on a wall. It's, I actually don't know what it stands for. That one is multiple choice and it's all online. So like your kid can just take it online. It's usually 2 or 3 days, depending on how many tests, you're going to have math. You're going to have 1 or 2 on language arts, and then you can choose science. And I think there might be another one, but for each test, it's another day, and it's anywhere between, they say like 45 minutes to an hour. I have a slow test taker, so she took like 2 hours to do it, but they're allowed to, like it's not timed. So that's homeschoolboss. I think it's .com. It could be .org. It's one of the two. That's the MAP test. Yeah, you just have to be there and like keep an eye on their internet connection, but you're not like actively doing anything. You're getting them on it and then they're taking the test themselves. You do not have to test them until you have to report them. So you would actually test your child 1 year earlier than the public schools. The public schools start doing standardized testing in 3rd grade. For homeschoolers, since you have to send in your intent to homeschool usually when they're in 2nd grade. I have one friend, her son's birthday is like September 30th or something. So for him, it was in 1st grade that he had to do his first standardized test. And I forget what I was going with that. Yeah, you will do it that 1st year. As long as you're sending in a piece of paper saying we are homeschooling, then you have to do that test. Are there any questions on this page? Okay. And then so Deanna, I'm gonna zoom out on this and hopefully you can take a screenshot of this whole page. So this last page that we have
Thank
here,
you.
perfect. This last page that we have here is different homeschool methods. So these are just labels for like different styles of homeschooling. And this is going to just be really personal. I will say, like, I started with the classical method with my oldest, and I think that worked really well for her. For my younger kids, I'm using the Charlotte Mason method. And that has been, especially for my second youngest, second oldest, she's very much language arts is where she really does very well. She loves reading. The Charlotte Mason method has been great for her. So you can read these different descriptions. And then if you go to this homeschool.com/approaches, you can read through it. There's actually a lot more homeschooling methods. And I think I said this while you were gone. You can choose one, you can choose more than one. It's not like a religion. You can like dabble in all of them. How this really is helpful is if listen, the Charlotte Mason method, this just jives with me. Like this feels good in my soul or whatever, right? Then you can search Charlotte Mason Science Curriculum 3rd grade. and you have already like narrowed down the types of curriculum that you're looking at, because it can be really overwhelming to see, okay, I want to do science this year. If you know what method you like using and what works with, and also your method that like you really like might be different than your child's method. So just being really flexible with that, but then understanding that between the two of you, you can choose curriculum that you're not going to get through the first unit and be like, this is garbage. Like, I don't want to use this. We have cried about this. We are fighting about this. So, of course, it's not like a perfect system, but it does help you narrow down your choices. And there's, it's called rainbowresource.com. Oh, I did put that on, didn't I? Yes, it's in the website section, rainbowresource.com. I think of it as like homeschooling Walmart, right? They have the microscopes, they have the clay, they have the markers, they have the construction paper, they have the math curriculum and the science curriculum and the history books. It is homeschooling Walmart, okay? It is owned by a Christian company. You can almost be guaranteed anything that's been around for more than 10 years is owned by a Christian company. You can decide how you feel about that. But they do have a really fantastic catalog that they will send you for free. And they have charts in that catalog that say, here's all the science or like the main science curriculum. I have like 20 or 30 science curriculum or science books. And then it will say it's for this age range, it's for this type of method, this is how much work it takes for the parent. So it'll be like low, medium, high of like parent involvement. Yeah, it's like this big chart with the dots on there and whatever, and it's super helpful, super helpful. That's like one of my first things that I go to when I'm going to kind of bridge from like elementary to middle school. So now I'm like looking for different resources. Or this last year we added in Spanish as a new subject for us. We've been doing Arabic and we added in Spanish this last year. And so it's like, I'm starting all over looking for this stuff. So one of the first things I did is I opened up my Rainbow Resource Catalog and looked at the foreign language section and like looked through that chart to kind of narrow down which one. So then I'm looking at 5 curriculums instead of 25. Are there any questions about that page? Okay. So let me go back here. Now we're on the what about slide. Here we are. So these are the typical things that people worry about when they're thinking about homeschooling. So socialization is the number one thing that you hear. How are you going to socialize the kids? As a longtime homeschooler, I would challenge you, if this is a great worry of yours, challenge you to rethink what you think socialization looks like. So when you socialize, like, what does that look like? Getting together with family, okay. Getting together with friends. So how do you make friends as an adult? Yeah, connecting with people through the mosque, okay.
Sometimes it's through other groups, like, for example, homeschool group, or sometimes mostly when I have similar interests with somebody else.
Yeah, and yes, similar interest is like a big one, a big one. So in homeschooling, it's the same thing. We're not just making friends based on age and geographic location, because the public school, they're really like, all my friends live in like my same geographic location generally. So that also means they're most likely in the same socioeconomic status that they are as well. A lot of schools are, unofficially segregated. So they're likely to be, they're likely to be around people that actually are a lot like them. And granted, the homeschool community is not the most diverse. to be perfectly frank. But where they can meet friends is, through sports. So my oldest daughter did fencing. So she would meet people at her fencing club. And that was like her social circle for a number of years, was her fencing friends. Of course, going to the masjid. My younger girls go to Pearls, Pearls of Hope in Blaine, which is like so far because I live down here. Like this is, I'm just about this far south, but I'm in Savage, so I'm further east. But we drive there basically for the socialization piece of it, and the mentorship and all of that kind of stuff. So sports, faith groups, our homeschooling group that we have that meets in the South, I think, are all three of you on the WhatsApp group? Deanna, are you on the WhatsApp group?
The ladies hangout group,
No,
or
Minnesota,
sorry.
the Minnesota homeschooler group.
Oh no, I'm not actually.
Okay. Do you want me to add you?
Yes, please. Sorry, we were talking about socialization for adults, so I thought that's what you meant.
No, it's fine. And we have a South Metro. Do I have you listed? Oh, I do. If I don't do this right now, I will forget. So I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
So I'm adding you to the South Metro homeschoolers group. So we meet weekly. Are you guys in the South Metro one? Taba and you're not? So we meet weekly, but we are usually Eden Prairie, Shakopee, Burnsville. We do occasionally like have something that's like the greater Twin Cities. But if you guys want to be added to that, I can add you to that as well. So that one's, it's once a week, Wednesdays at 12:30. Okay. Let me, and Deanna, I am also adding you. So there's two groups. One is like general, called Minnesota Muslim Homeschoolers, and that's for like the whole metro area. The South one, for people I haven't met in person and I've just met online, I don't add people to the South one because sometimes we give out home addresses. Like during the summer, we mostly park hop. So like we might, we're just park hopping. And then during the winter, we tend to meet at people's houses. So that's why I'm like a bit more protective about the South group, but now I've met you, you seem trustworthy, so alhamdulillah. And then okay, copy link. I am going to, sorry for the dead time here. So Mehtab, I'm gonna send you the link. Taba, I don't know if I have your contact information, but just for the sake of me. So I sent it to Mehtab. If you can send it to her, I just sent you the link to add yourself. There we go. Okay. So that group is where a lot of my kids have made some of their really close friends, and it's so cute. So I have all daughters, and of course they're like, who am I going to marry when I'm older? And like whoever they talk about always tends to be from that group. And since we like go to people's houses, my youngest one, she was like, I want to marry Ibrahim because his mom has yogurt covered raisins. Yes. So like that's a place where, there, of course we want to have diverse friends. So like for our family, other places that we socialize, I'm really into nature study, being outside. That doesn't like, I like being outside in 20-degree weather more than 80-degree weather. So, I have my limits, but there's like a nature walk group that my kids go on that they've made some really good friends there. And there's Christians and pagans and all the things there. And like, we connect on that, just like my kids love to splash in mud puddles, and like other people that come with kids in clothes that are ready to splash in mud puddles, like just people that go camping, so that's also like a connecting. Huh?
You could act, so we do that.
You do?
We're sister-in-laws.
Oh,
Our
mashallah.
husbands are brothers.
Okay.
So that's what we do. Our weekends, once a month, we've been going camping, and our kids like to do all the things that you mentioned.
Oh, good. Yes. Perfect. So again, it's like about shared interests. There's other people that like, yeah, whatever it is. I'm sure you can kind of extrapolate that as you wish. So we also are in 4-H. So our 4-H group actually stemmed off of our South Metro homeschooler group. 4-H in itself is non-religious. So we're starting to get more people in that are not from our homeschooling group, but they are, because it's at the same time, like they're also homeschoolers, but like our connecting thread is going to be 4-H. So my kids have made 4-H friends. They're in shooting sports. They've learned archery through 4-H. So they have friends there. So there's sometimes that I wish we did less socialization. There's like once you really get in the community and like you find your tribe, there's times where you're like, no, like we need to be home sometimes. Like we need to like do the books sometimes. So I think in concept, I can see how it's a question, but in practice, I don't know many homeschoolers unless they're like really, really, really introverted and it's a lot of work for them to get out of the house, or if it's a lot of work for them to get out of the house because they have many small children, that can be an issue. But that would also be an issue, in a public school as well, if they're just getting, their classroom time and not playtime outside of that. Okay, organization. So what I always tell people, you are as organized as you need to be. I'm going to assume that you generally get yourself to the dentist when you need to go to the dentist. You generally, like when you had your babies, you got to your midwife or doctor appointments. Like you bring your car in if it's starting to break. Like maybe you're not on top of like what is it, oil changes, right? But like if it's making a weird sound, you bring it in. Like when there's a problem, you fix it. So when you start homeschooling, you will find a way. You don't know the way because you're not homeschooling yet, like if you're not. And it takes a while, right? Like the organization that I had for homeschooling 10 years ago looks very different than now, because now I have, like, when I was homeschooling my oldest, we had a bunch of books, but we didn't have like math counting tiles and cubes and whatever. But now we do. We have a bunch of things and we have Arabic puzzles and like whatever. So I need to organize differently. Um, Same thing, like how I organize my day might look different than yours. Like the way that I do it just might not be your style. So you're going to expect to kind of try on a system and be like, this worked, this didn't. So now I'm going to try something a little bit new. It doesn't mean you failed. It means that you're just learning and growing. Um, and you will see, as you think that you're failing, you will be surprised how many things they get out of it. One thing that, so one of my kids, actually two of them, kind of struggled in reading in that first, second grade age, struggled compared to like public school expectations. And then we used to own a duplex and we had a renter that was awful, awful, awful. He stopped paying. He was like verbally abusive, so like my stress level was like here. So anytime the kids were like, I don't want to, I'm like, fine, we're not doing anything. Go watch TV, because my stress was just like through the roof and I couldn't handle like any kind of bump in the road. So unless they were like, I love math, like we didn't do it. And somehow in those like 6 months that things were like really rough, she started reading chapter books. She went from like, how do I read like this one word, and like really picking apart each word, to like reading chapter books. And because sometimes they're just ready. They're just like, they go through learning spurts just like they go through growth spurts. You can't make an 11-month child walk before they're ready. Like one of my kids didn't walk until she was like 17 months old. Nothing was wrong with her. I think my personal, opinion is she crawled so fast that she was like, why would I do something slower? Like I can get there faster if I crawl. So sometimes it's just having that patience. So don't always take like they're struggling is my fault. They're struggling means I'm not organized, because it's not always about you. Sometimes they're just not ready. And that really ties in with patience of like, yes, we want to see progress. I keep kind of talking about like, don't push it and like be patient and all. It doesn't mean that I'm like totally fine with like my 18-year-old kid not knowing any algebra and like not being able to read. It doesn't mean that at all. But that patience comes from allowing there to be some variance in the day, but also like, you don't have to be patient 100% of the time. Like I'm really not a patient person. Like I'm really, really, really not. And I yell at my kids and then I say that I'm sorry because it's not about the rupture, it's about the repair. So a lot of people say like, I don't have the patience to homeschool. If I waited for my patience to homeschool, we would never homeschool. But when you're kind of pressed against one of your shortcomings, sometimes that's the times where you grow. And so I have become a way more patient person than I was before. Still, like, it went from like no patience to like mediocre patient. Like I still wouldn't consider myself a patient person. But it's just that practice of, okay, this matters, this doesn't, and just allowing for that growth. And also, I think when kids see us, let's see. So it's like, let me take a step back. A lot of times when we worry about our patients, it's almost worrying about the relationship that we're going to keep with our kids, right? Like I'm going to ruin this relationship with my kid if I'm around them all the time and I'm not a patient person. But it also teaches them communication skills. If we lose our patience and we come back with an apology, we come back with saying, I'm sorry, the renter hasn't paid. Like at the time, I think my youngest was like 2. It's 2018. She's 6. So she was 3. So at 3 years old, she learned the renter hasn't paid. I need to like chill. I need to not bother mom, because it was such a really stressful situation. And I would flip out on the kids, because I was so stressed. Because it wasn't just that he didn't pay. It was like a lot of other things that were just all kind of wrapped up into it. But during that, I got to teach them that this isn't your fault. I'm stressed because of this and so now I hear my kids say to their siblings, like when they kind of blow up, I'm sorry I didn't sleep well last night. So I think that I don't have a lot of patience today. I'm sorry if I wish I would have done better in archery today. And I'm kind of frustrated already. So just, there's so much that they learn from seeing us make mistakes and correct them. Where in public school, those mistakes are not allowed. So that teacher might be really, really, really frustrated. She's not allowed to go off on the kids. We're like, we could totally go off on our kids and like nobody's, like we could yell at them and the neighbors are like, whoa, somebody didn't brush their teeth on time. Like nobody's coming for us. But the teachers are not allowed to do that. And so like my oldest daughter, like really thought that I was the only adult like in the world that yelled at her kids. So like a friend of mine yelled at her kids in front of us and she was like, sorry. I'm like, no, thank you. now she sees like other parents yell at their kids because she was so used to like adults that were in paid positions that are not allowed to to kind of like let go. They're probably yelling at their kids when they go home because they're all like pent up. Anyways. So what about a quality education plan? I touched on this before of like, you will find the resources. And when you can't find the resources, you'll reach out. There's a beautiful community. I think you guys have probably seen in the Minnesota Muslim Homeschooler Facebook group where we start to talk about curriculum a little bit. And like, so you can ask people, has anybody used this? What's your feedback? You can look at reviews. Also, everything that's available to the public school, you can buy it yourself. If you really want to do what the public schools are doing, you can buy those books and you can use them at home. It's not something specific to them. And so for my oldest daughter, we used a lot of things that the public school did because she was from a previous relationship and her dad was not always on board. So I'm like, this is 11th grade science textbook. And he's like, okay. So if you have some of those like naysayers in your life, those are resources that you can use. High school, college, we talked about this already a little bit. I will say my husband was also homeschooled through high school, went into college. Colleges will accept your transcript that you printed out at home. Colleges will, they're actually like looking for homeschoolers sometimes because they tend to be more self-directed and not need as much pushing. Because by the time they get to high school, a lot of homeschoolers are mostly doing it themselves. They're like taking the book, they're taking their work, they're being more in control of their time. I won't, obviously that's different for each home and how each parent functions. But it is not a hindrance for homeschoolers to try to get into college.
When do we start preparing for high school?
So I would say, like, it's always kind of on the horizon. Like, my child that's like, she doesn't like math as much as she likes the other subjects. She's not bad at it, but she just doesn't. And it takes her a little bit longer sometimes to calculate things. I still have it in my mind. I want her to get to pre-algebra by 8th grade. So as we're going along, I'm trying to keep her on track of that. So if we have a day where like we're only going to be home for a couple hours, I make sure we do math because I kind of have that in the back of my mind. And then my general advice is when they're in 8th grade is when you formally start keeping grades. When they're elementary school, it's just kind of pass failed, or even not like fail, but just like pass and things with feedback. Middle school, you're going to start giving a bit more feedback, but when it comes to you got an A, B, C, D, start doing that in 8th grade. There's some people who unschool, which it's not exactly what it sounds like, but you can look at the description that's on the handout that say that their grades are, I don't even know how to explain it. Like once they finish a project, let's say the kids built a chicken coop, right? So this counts as math and some science because you have to like, I don't know. I've never built a chicken coop, so just fill in all the blanks. In science and all of those things. And then they'll say, like, what grade do you think that you would get for this? How much effort did you put into it? How much did you look into it? So on and so forth. And they would like agree on a grade. So like you're allowed to do that. If you're going to do formal grades, I would start in 8th grade because it's actually like, it is really hard for mom to go from like, yeah, you passed. All right, let's move on to I need to like decide on a grade on this. So it's almost more for, it's equally for you and your student to start that in 8th grade. Okay, anything else about like this what about section?
So I think when it comes to patience, so our kids are going through their personal milestones as they're growing up. I sometimes, I'm not sure if I need to where like the patience, how much do I push and how much like I have a kid who imitates me. If I'm yelling, the next thing I see her yelling at her younger sister because she imitates everything. So I'm constantly working on myself.
Yeah.
Because I want obviously her to do that, but so if I'm going to tell her in the front tone, she's going to use that one. And so it's that how do you impose at the same time create that love of learning because I hear that's the biggest thing you want to.
Yeah.
Where is the balance? If I just leave her to be, or do I have to find it out myself? Or just if I leave her to be, will not get anything done.
I think it's always going to be an ongoing process. So when it comes to patients and seeing if they're on the right track and adjusting behaviors and all of that, like, I mean, we're still learning, right? Like, we're still, who buys the self-help books? It's not a 6-year-old. Like, this is a thriving genre of books because we're still learning. So I think that they are not going to come to a place of like perfect adulthood while they're under our roof. So, I mean, it's about progress, not perfection. So I have one child who, kind of, she's big emotions. So that's something that we're working on with her. And I have different expectations of her sisters because they don't have that same struggle. So it's equitable treatment. So I expect different things out of each of them because they're just in different places. Um, but yeah, like if they're mimicking you, like in a good way. So same thing. When I am yelling at my kids, my 10-year-old, well, she hasn't done it so recently. And I also haven't yelled as much recently, in part because my husband has been home. It's a lot easier to yell at your kids when your husband's not home. Like, I hate to admit it, but it really like, so alhamdulillah for the pandemic that it's like forced me to, like rein it in a little bit. But I did notice when I would yell at her, then she would yell at her sisters. So, I mean, yeah, it's just this give and take. Like, there's so much that we learn from our kids. There's so much that we learn from our kids. So I don't know that I have a perfect answer. I don't have a perfect answer. But I don't think there is one. That's my, or maybe that's what I'm telling myself because I don't have a perfect.
So if they just come in every morning with the attitude, I don't want to do this, or I'm not willing, or what are you supposed to do? How do you?
So I think it depends on so the question was, what do you do if they come in and they don't want to do school? It really depends on the kid. So all of my kids want to be homeschooled. They want to be with each other, and they know that like if they were to go to school, they would be like in separate classrooms. They know that I've also kind of talked it up, right? Like in school, you only have a 15-minute recess and we go to the park for like 2 hours. And if you were in school, you wouldn't be able to take this long of time to eat lunch, and like a lot of schools have the rule that you can't talk during lunch. So, I do kind of sell homeschooling to them a bit. And I tell them I am required by law for you to get an education. So if we don't do this, I am breaking the law. So it's either this or you go to school, and then you have your 15-minute recess. You can't talk to people during lunch, so on and so forth. Sometimes they just have to. I mean, every kid is different. One of my kids, I could start with like a fun subject, and then that would kind of because for me, the hardest thing, there was like one season where it was really hard to get them to the table. Like literally they would be kicking and screaming, I don't want to do school. One thing I did, and this is where it's like just brainstorming with other moms. One thing I did is we talked and we're like, we know that we have to do this. She was like 7. We know that we have to do this. What do you think would help? And one thing we did is we actually started school earlier because she would get done with breakfast and she would start playing. So she didn't want to stop playing. So it's like, well, what if we start school earlier and then you would end school earlier and then you can play without interruption afterwards. So that helped for her to feel like she was part of finding the solution. It's not like the next day she was like, I'm so excited to come to the table. But I got to remind her, this is what we agreed on. And as they get older, you can have more of those conversations. She was still like first grade or something. So there's still that like emotional immaturity that we still had to kind of contend with. But in general, it helped. So And you can always, like, that's one of the things with this WhatsApp group. Well, like when we meet in person, especially, there's so many times we've come in and we're like, throwing in the towel, I'm done with this. And if you say that to like a public school parent, they're meaning well, but they're like, yeah, maybe homeschooling is just not right. And you say that to a fellow homeschooling parent, and they're like, let's brainstorm this together, and saying, yeah, I had that trouble too. And these are some things that we did. And now we're on the other side of it. You're welcome. And then the last thing before, the last thing, and then we'll just open it up for any questions that we didn't cover yet. Typical homeschool day. So usually I have a couple people here. It is the summer after COVID, so everybody's doing everything. So that's why I don't have more people. So I'll just tell you about how our day looks. I'll tell you last year because I have my plan for this year, but I've also learned that my plan in September looks different than what I do in February. Usually like kind of morphs into something else. So the last couple of years, like I said, I was teaching at Beit al-Hikmah and they were doing a Quran class there. So we would, the kids would get up about 7:30. So my 10-year-old would get up at like 7:30. She also is an early riser, alhamdulillah. She would start school at 8:30. I would do school with her from 8:30 to 9:30. So that's all the things, because she has more subjects than her younger sisters. And then her sisters would come in and we would do subjects together. So like alone, she would do language arts, foreign language, spelling, and then we would get started on math. And usually by the time she was like doing a worksheet, then I would bring in her sisters and they would have a couple things, maybe like phonics or whatever that we could do like while she's doing a worksheet. And then we would do social studies together, or not social studies last year, sorry. We would do like nature study, all of our Islamic studies we did together. We did science together. Yeah, just those type of things. And then when one kid's doing math, then I would have my oldest daughter do something that she could do independently. And then we would be done by 11:30. We would eat lunch, get ready to go to the school, leave the house at 12:30, and we would do social studies there. And then after Salah, we would do, my kids would have Quran class for an hour and a half. And then I was helping the school with like setting up field trips, stuff in their library, that kind of stuff. And then we were done. So it was a little bit longer day because we were at the school for part of the day. But we will be done with book work by 12:30, I'm hoping, this upcoming year. And then I'll have some things for them to do in the afternoons. So that's what our typical day looks like. I usually do our literature stuff as bedtime stories. So that's everything that I have. Do you guys have any other questions, comments, concerns?
I like how you put all the pictures here.
Yes. There's lots of coffee in our homeschool day.
Do you have all your meals cooked in the weekend or after school?
For meals,
Yeah, for meals. Or when is your time plus the meals?
yeah, because my time is not making the meals,
Yeah.
right?
No, I get it together.
Yes. So my time is for some years, I would make sure that I ate lunch separate from my kids. Because I did, so my oldest daughter, she like, I don't know if all kids are this way, but like there comes a time where like, so her name is Kira, and I would call it the Kira show, where she's like, do you guys have like 10 kids that are 10 plus? You have a 10-year-old. I don't know if this has started with them or not, or like maybe it was just unique to her, but she'd be like, did you see the way that I walked? She would like walk a funny way, or she'd like laugh a funny way. Did you hear my laugh? Like everything was just like she's on TV the whole time. And I've talked to some other parents and they're like, yeah, there's definitely like this stage where they act like the whole world is watching them the whole time. So I needed to eat lunch separate because I'm like, I don't want to watch the Cure show 24 hours a day. And now like my kids are younger, so like I have to sit there, otherwise they just play with their food and whatever. A lot of time my alone time is after dinner. They clean up after dinner. They don't do a great job, but they clean up after dinner, and then I have like a book of puzzles and stuff that I like, Sudoku type puzzles. And then after they go to bed, like they know this is my time. I'm a better mom if you stop talking to me after 9 o'clock. Like so their bedroom's downstairs. They can read and color, and they still like play and do things they're not supposed to do, but they're generally, they might take out games or puzzles or whatever. But I don't want them upstairs. Like, I love you, but I don't want to see you right now. Like, so that's my time. And then making dinners. I mean, we're usually done in time for me to just make dinner. I have started, so like my mom is one of 5 kids, and she said, and granted, there's like, I think 12 years between the youngest and the oldest. So they weren't all home at the same time when they were doing this, but my grandma taught all of them to cook, and then each one, when they were old enough, would cook dinner 1 day a week. So she never had 5 days a week of dinners cooked because, you know, kids start moving out and stuff. But I'm like, we are doing that. So now my 10-year-old makes dinner once a week. And it might be things like pesto, which is just boil noodles, take the Costco pesto and go, you know, and then like make a vegetable or like bring out salad or whatever. Or she makes grilled cheese. She can put some stuff in the crock pot and like or the Instant Pot and turn that on. So little by little, I'm like teaching her how to make dinner. And so 1 day a week, I don't cook dinner, you know. But yeah, the Instant Pot is your best friend, as I'm sure, I mean, you guys already know. Yeah, does that answer your question? I usually do grocery shopping during the day too. So, yeah.
Sometimes I feel I'm not doing justice to my older one because I pay a lot of attention to my younger one teaching.
Mhm.
And so I just feel like I'm neglecting her and then she has to fend for herself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I struggle with balance. Like by the time I'm done teaching him, I'm like overwhelmed and tired, and I'm like, oh, I still have to finish up with her.
Yeah. Yep.
So how do you strike that?
Yeah, so maybe start with her first, especially if she's a little bit easier, because with the younger kids, can you remind me the ages of your kids?
10 and 8.
10 and 8, okay. Yeah, so maybe it works better to start with her, or at least start some subjects that are like kind of high priority. You know, my 10-year-old is not a fantastic speller, so that's one of the reasons why it's like at the beginning, you know, is I want to make sure that we get that in, because definitely like most days I have like 6 to 8 subjects that I'm hoping to get through, and I usually don't do all of them. But like as the day kind of goes on, I decide which ones I'm going to skip. But I mean, some of them are like art appreciation, where we like, and the kids love doing it. So, but it'll be like, you know, a print, like a classic art print, and they study it for 2 minutes, and then I take it and I'm like, tell me what you saw. So, I mean, some of them like, the world is not going to end if I skip that subject. Or we actually skip Arabic a lot because it takes a lot of work. Like I can teach it, alhamdulillah, I can teach it, but I'm still to a level where like it's a lot of work for me to teach it. And we use a site called ArabicSeeds.com, and they have like themes. So in those, I'm learning too. So it's like, do I have the mental energy to like learn these and stumble over the words with them? So sometimes we skip that. And I bought it's called Arabian Sinbad. They made like these cartoons. They have like 8 30-minute episodes or something. So sometimes I'm like, you guys go watch that, you know? So then I'm still skipping like skipping things, but like I know which things I can skip. Like I kind of have like a mental roster of like, nope, we haven't done that in a while. We should get back to that, you know. And also like just for that ease through the day. So it's a Montessori idea, or not Montessori. It might be Montessori. I'm not sure. Waldorf. It's a Waldorf idea, and it's found in the Charlotte Mason method as well. Is that you kind of go back and forth between like a really like academic subject, for lack of a better term, you know, math, reading, whatever, and then your next subject might be art appreciation, and then you're going to do literature, and then you're going to draw about your literature. So it's like you're getting this mental break in between the day, and it really helps you to get through the rest of the day, because you're not like hard subject after hard subject after hard subject. And I think sometimes when we really try to pare down because we're busy or we don't have the energy, or you know, we're pregnant or nursing or have a renter that's not paying or whatever, we tend to take out all the like fun subjects, which really, if you look at art, it ties in so many different subjects, especially math and science. Art is like so much math and science if you really pay attention to it. But we take those out, and then we end up with like math, spelling, grammar, math, spelling, grammar, you know, and we've like taken all the joy out of the day, or 98% of the joy out of the day, and then we wonder why we're so tired, because we haven't like sprinkled in anything that like, one, connects everything, and two, like where we get to see it in real life, you know.
For like special learners, for example, we have holistic learners, could be gifted, slow learner, struggling learner.
Mm-hmm.
How do you like? Is there a way? It's just general question. How do you supplement for those if you have a child like that?
So it really, I think there's subjects that you do independently. Math is a pretty obvious one. Reading as well can be a pretty obvious one. And you just, one, you meet them where they're at. Two, I think with struggling learners, it really helps to have some subjects that you're all doing together. So again, like your Islamic studies, maybe you're reading a book aloud. So you're not always doing something at their level. Sometimes you're stretching them with the books that you're reading aloud. Or in the other direction, like you might have some, so like we do nature study, and I have some books that are like graded readers. So like grade 1 nature study reader, grade 2 nature study reader. And so I can have the child read at their level, and then that is for everybody, even though for the 4th grader, it might be new information, but it's, you know, the reading level is lower. So just bringing them in whenever you can, but then also setting aside that time for each kid. So like in my perfect day, I start with my oldest alone, and then I end with my youngest alone. My youngest was kindergarten last year, so she got skipped a lot, but I'm hoping that
She learned though.
she did. She really did.
Oh, you didn't have to teach her.
I know. Yeah, she learned so much. Like she does. I mean, she doesn't really know her letters, but you know what? When I was in kindergarten, we didn't know our letters either. So that like really hits it home for me. You know, did you guys grow up here or East Africa? Okay. So a lot of people worry, you know, am I doing what the schools are doing? I will tell you, after 12 years of homeschooling, like I don't think about the public school almost ever. And I don't have to. As a public or a homeschooler, I don't have to think about the public school and what they're doing. So you can teach your kid to read at 8. You can teach them to read at 5. Nobody's knocking on your door and checking. And there's studies that show that kids learning how to read earlier you don't see a lot of benefits after 4th grade. Like it just really evens out. And if they have negative experiences from like feeling like they're a bad reader when they were trying to learn how to read when they're 6 and 7 and so on, that they actually have a harder time later, and they like associate reading with those negative feelings, and they tend to read worse later on. So I guess I would also just question what is struggling, and there's definitely kids who are struggling in different areas. But I would make sure they really are struggling, and not just that we've imposed on them a timeline that we feel that they have to meet, but like, what did that timeline come from? Is that based on like real research? Like what happens? So there's one guy, he helped write, it's the Institute for Excellence in Writing. It's an organization. They have lots and lots and lots of language arts curriculum. They generally fall under the classical method. So if you use the classical method, a lot of times you'll kind of run into, it's called IEW. His name is Andrew Pudewa. And so like, you watch lectures of this guy talking about like the beauty of poetry and the value of literature and like all of this stuff. And then he tells you, my kid didn't learn how to read until they were 11. Like they kept trying and the kid was just not, it wasn't clicking. That like decoding of words did not happen until the kid was 11. But because they were surrounded by poetry and good literature, and they were reading aloud all the time and like memorizing poetry and stuff, by the time he could read, his reading level was like fantastic, because he had this huge vocabulary just sitting inside of him, waiting for him to be able to decode the letters, because that's really what he was stuck on, is just like the decoding. And English is really tough when it comes to that. So again, it's just, you know, of course, if there's like a real learning challenge like dyslexia, let's say dyslexia, because I know how to say that one. So let's say there's like dyslexia or whatever, like, of course you want to address those for sure. I'm not saying that those like, that they're not real or that they're not a problem. But outside of that, you know, sometimes it's just allowing them that space to explore the things that they're good at. And like, you keep working at the thing that they're not good at, but you're not like hyper focused on it. You're also allowing them to feel successful in all the, because think about it, like if somebody can't read, that's one thing, and it is a big thing, but are they great at like handicrafts? Are they great at sports? Are they great at creating things, you know, at building toy bridges and whatever? So make sure that there's areas where they feel successful, so they feel I can do this, instead of the like, I'm just a dumb kid, you know.
For the opposite, like for the gifted learner, they use something to make sure that you're able to challenge them.
Yeah. So for a gifted learner, I mean, again, you just meet them where they are. Yeah. So it's, you know, if they are gifted in math, then you're just getting the math level that they're at. If they're gifted at language arts, or, you know, reading, because language arts is a pretty broad scope. And it's not always, so for gifted learners, it's not about always finding just a curriculum. You know, if they're really gifted in certain things. So one of my kids, we're realizing she really, really loves to write poetry. That doesn't mean I give her more poetry homework. It means that I give her time and space in that, like, we were listening to Nasheed's on Spotify. Have you guys heard of Buna Mohammed? I think he's, I don't know if he's African American or like born in Africa, or, but like he appears African American, and he does spoken word. So some of them now have like vocals on the back, so it sounds more like a Nasheed, but he started out with spoken word. And so like it came across my Spotify Nasheed playlist, and I'm like, I knew of him as like a spoken word artist. So I turned it on and she's like, I love this. So it's just introducing them to the things that they're gifted at, so they can enjoy that and they can explore that. Because one great way to like squelch their giftedness is to be like, I made all these assignments for you and I expect this to be done by Friday, you know? You're overwhelmed. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. All right, so Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamu alaikum. And Deanna logged off, so